The following episode contains or may contain spoilers, so if you're spoiler sensitive, maybe beware.
Yeah, you sensitive people.
Get out.
No, get in. All right, welcome to the FANtom Zone, 3 fans, 1 podcast, and a sea of comics. I'm Noah.
Kayla.
And Jared.
And today we have a very, very special guest. So we're so happy to have Julie Murphy with us.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Yay!
Yeah. So we're so happy to have you here today with us. So for those of you that don't know who Julie Murphy is, she is a #1 New York Times best-selling author. She wrote books such as Puddin', Ramona Blue, Side Effects May Vary, and Dumplin, which actually just recently was adapted into a Netflix movie. The reason why we have her on today is because we're talking about Faith Taking Flight. So it's a Valiant property. And super excited that this was turned into a novelization because I loved the comics. So,
oh, thank you. It was like so much fun to do. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm gonna kick it off because we have only a limited amount of time, and I've got a lot that I want to ask you. First of all, you probably know this is a comic book based podcast, so we're super interested in like superhero mythos, the medium, and everything like that. So I was just curious, like, what your background was. Did you grow up reading comics? I got the sense from the novel you at least had a pretty strong sense of the medium and things like that. So I'm just curious about that.
Oh, well, that's good that you got a strong sense of that because no, I didn't grow up reading comics. I think I wish that I had. I think it would have been a really cool layer to my own personality. But no, I did not grow up reading comics. I think, you know, everyone's got their thing that they nerd out over as a kid. And mine was really thick novels that I wasn't supposed to be reading yet, like Clan of Bear.
Nice.
Was also like the first Birds and the Bees talk I ever got. Highly inappropriate. But yeah, so I am actually a former librarian. And so my first real deep dive into like any kind of like visual storytelling outside of picture books, like comics, graphic novels, like manga, all that stuff was as a librarian working with my teens. Because I was like, you guys should read this really cool 400-page book. And they're like, yeah, that's cool, but doesn't have pictures. And I was like, oh no. So that was really my first, dive into comics was as a librarian.
Wow. So were you more focused on teen and young adult when you were a librarian, or I'm not sure how libraries really work as far as working in them.
Well, there's books and they're free. But I worked mostly with teens when I was in the public library sector. And then when I was in the academic world, I worked a lot with stoner community college students. So, I've been all across the board. But yeah, I spent a lot of
time. Wait, have we met already?
It's possible. I've met a lot of men in my life. So.
I just wanted to follow up because, I after reading it, like I wouldn't say I could tell you hadn't read comics, but I think that it was a really interesting take on the sort of like origin, the like superhero origin. Like that was the most sort of striking thing to me.
Well, I think that, I discovered Faith around like 2015, 2016. And so I'd definitely been a fan of Faith before I started working with Valiant, before I was approached by them. So I had that under my belt in a way, but really I didn't want to read too much in the genre because I wanted to be able to make something new and to bring something new to the table. I wanted it to feel like a superhero origin story, but what I really love to write is like a coming of age story. And not that a superhero origin story can't be that, but I really love like the emotional arc of a coming of age story. And I wanted Faith to have like those great superhero moments, but I wanted them to be in contrast with like the emotional arc of like, finding out that the person who's your guardian is a human being, and someday they're going to die, or finding out that like your friends make mistakes and they're not perfect, and that you sometimes have like this whole version of yourself built up in your head that exists to them when in reality that's not the case. So yeah, definitely.
I could definitely see that with reading the book. I liked it a lot because a lot of times in comics, it seems that the superhero just gets the power and then the comic starts, and then then you find out everything in reverse. But with this, it was awesome to see the coming of age and her figuring out who she was, and then going into really the superhero, figuring out who she was as a superhero, kind of secondary. I really liked that.
Yeah, I think that there's, having worked with film in a little bit, and then working with now comics to novels, I've learned very quickly that there's certain things that specific mediums can't do, and there's certain things that mediums really have this incredible strength with. So with like film and comics, it's always going to be that visual aspect. That's something that a novel can never do. But I was trying to think about what's something that a comic can do that a novel can, and to sort of innovate from there.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, it's a pretty sort of like comic book production is a pretty like collaborative thing, but very clearly you're on the writing end of this, and we have writers on the show. Kayla, anyway.
I gotta hear more about this, Kayla.
We're always interested in the writing process, so I'm curious, and this, being a comic thing, do you have a writing kryptonite? Like, is there a challenge when you sit down to write that, or maybe over the process that's the thing that you struggle against, that kind of thing?
I think that writing in general is my kryptonite. Having to do it.
Oh no!
I love thinking about it, and I love what happens after I've done it. But I do think that the hardest part for me will always be like the frustration that's like, there's this version of the story that exists in your head, and there's the version of the story that exists on paper, and having to join those two together is really exciting, but also excruciating, because it's so frustrating to know how cool something
excruciating is the perfect word.
Yeah. And then seeing the reality of what you can actually accomplish is like, oh, I guess I'm not that cool. So yeah,
it hurts, the truth.
It hurts, but it's the reason why I keep doing it at the same time, because I'll never be good enough, which is depressing, but also like, I don't want to keep doing something that I can't continue to improve upon.
I mean, I got to tell you that as a would-be writer, I like to hear a New York Times best-selling writer say this. That's so encouraging.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, because I do feel like it's like if a person who is writing at your level still admits like it's difficult. There's a kind of artistic excruciation. Then that rest of us are not alone in this writing world.
You're not alone until you have to sit in front of your laptop and actually do the writing. Writing is a lot like death, in that like when you're writing a novel, the only way you can do it is by yourself. You can only die by yourself.
That's so true.
Yep. I like how dark this is getting.
Yeah.
Keep it up.
Heroes. I'm sorry.
One of the things that I read about you that I thought was really cool to hear is that you came late to the Twilight series and you really loved it. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
It's totally true. I have like an unabashed love for Twilight. It's multifold. Like it's there's several reasons why, but I came to the Twilight series when I was in my last year of college, and I was going to school for political science research, which sounds just about as dull as you can imagine it might. But I loved it. But as I was reading that book, I was like, oh my God, this woman wrote a book about a sparkling vampire and a whole world fell in love with it. So maybe I can write one book that someone might read. And that's not a knock on Stephanie Meyer. It's just to say that like she really made writing accessible and relatable to me. I think I had this idea that to be a writer, you had to be dead, like a dead white guy or something.
Right.
It helps. It certainly seems to help.
Like even as like I guess Harry Potter came out around the time I was in high school. When those books came out, I thought that like they were so far off in my like peripheral worldview that in my head I was like, J.K. Rowling is dead and people are just now rediscovering these books and getting excited about them. Is that what's happening? Like unless you were Nora Roberts or Stephen King, I just thought everyone had died already.
Right.
So yeah, I can't remember what the initial point was, but there you go.
Well, the reason I think that's wonderful is that like on this podcast, like we take comics weirdly seriously, right? I mean, we have fun, we love them, but we think the art form is really meaningful, and it's really cool to see somebody kind of approach this because, like, when I read the novel, like I was like, man, there are some really serious themes in this. It does not shy away from that, and I'm curious also, you know, because you weren't necessarily a huge sort of comic fan. What were the challenges of basically taking something that's primarily like like a visual medium, and then turning that into sort of like this discursive novelization? Did you take to that like a duck to water, or was it like a lot of obstacles? How did that work out for you?
Well, I think the most exciting thing about reading a comic is what you can bring to the table. Like when you're reading it, like, there's so many different places where your imagination can fill in the blank. And so in a way, the most difficult thing was writing something that would match whatever someone already had in their head. Do you know what I mean? So writing something that the fans of Faith who already existed were going to be excited about, and something that wasn't going to conflict with like their really exciting ideas about what Faith was and what Faith meant to them. That was really, really daunting. And I mean, too, like, I think that, I mean, every little section of like art or fandom has this, but there's those really vicious fans every once in a while that you have to deal with. And the thing is, like, to be totally honest, the times that I've dealt with really vicious people on the internet in regards to Faith, they're probably people who don't even read Faith. They're just people who read comics in general and feel very protective over that space and don't like to see fat ladies in it, I guess.
Right.
So that, I think, like, knowing that could be a possibility and then knowing that it's a reality was a really difficult thing. But then also just wanting to do right by the people who really, really love Faith, because I know what it means to love something and then to see a reiteration of it or like a recreation of it and be deeply offended by it. Like I am obsessed with Ursula, and anytime anyone even talks about any kind of like Little Mermaid retelling or like anything where there's a sea witch, I'm like, how dare you? How dare you? Ursula is a drag queen.
Right.
I think we all have those things that nothing anyone else ever does will ever be enough or right.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I feel like, especially being in one of those fandoms, everybody's part of some type of fandom, and you can just see those people that get oddly protective of the weirdest things, like the little colors that are on the costume or how they decided to talk to this character that they normally do. It is interesting, but it's good to know that you have a good attitude about it. You're like, I made something good, and these people are like...
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's really two kinds of people. There are the people who just want to be assholes about absolutely anything, and then there's the people who are upset because they're passionate, and that's something I can understand.
Right.
That positive form of fandom, by the way, is very present in the novel. Like I was impressed by that too, because it's like not only is Faith, but her friends Chess and Matt very much like bond over fandom and everything like that. Faith's parents were big cosplayers. It's a very non-toxic version of fandom. By the way, I would have warned you before you got into this how much toxicity there was out there in the comic book world.
Okay. Sadly, I know a lot of female gamers who warned me that like they were like like toxic comic book world is adjacent to toxic gamer world, so prepare yourself. But also, I mean, in like the world of fiction, we have really toxic, like literary hoity-toity dumb people. So it's just a different kind of toxic. They like to shade you while they're wearing their loafers, I guess. I
don't know. Did you know that, by the way? Like, I didn't come into this knowing it. We were reading comic books all sort of by ourselves, right? And then the internet takes off in social media, and you were like, oh my God, there are racist Spider-Man fans? How does that even work?
Yeah, how can you even be racist and be a Spider-Man fan? And yet here we are. Yeah, I think it was just like the proliferation of the internet that made me so aware of everyone's never-ending faults.
So, well, you know, like your book gets pretty heavy. So let's get a little heavy with our questions here. And because, you know, I almost, whenever I talk to somebody who's sort of new to the comic book space, it's sort of like in line with what we're talking about, I almost want to apologize for the history of the medium, because it's really been a sort of like, I mean, historically planted a really toxic space as far as like, you know, hypersexualization, objectification of women, like just the idea of a very specific, unrealistic look that people, especially women, have to sort of like they get subjected to. You have, you know, I mean, all kinds of communities. Like, I mean, two of us are gay on the podcast. We did a history of gay characters on the show, and the amount of gay characters in comics is just so like minute.
Was it a very short episode?
Yeah, exactly.
We stretched it.
They're there. You have to hunt for them. But the thing is, reading your book, it's not like that. You would, if you read this book and you didn't have a sense of that toxic history, you wouldn't know that. Right. This book has so much LGBTQ representation. It has so much representation for plus size women, very clearly based on who the protagonist is. And I think what I'm curious about, and we've talked about this, like what we're curious about, I guess, is how much of that was just you organically writing, you know, your experience and your world, and how much it was like an intended kind of political statement. It's like, this is what it should be like.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the one hand, like, it's a very natural place for me to go to. Like, I want to write about people who are like me. I want to write about people who are queer. I want to write about people who are fat. I want to write about people whose, like, you know, social circles reflect that same diversity that you see literally every day in the world. And I think that there's this idea, especially after having worked with some people in film, that like change has to be slow. And that's bullshit. Because when you're in the driver's seat, like the only effort it takes to make a change is to actually make the change and just do it and just go into it. And I mean, I know so many queer comic book fans. I know so many like plus size comic book fans. I know so many comic book fans of color. Like, it doesn't make any sense for us not to reflect those people in these spaces. So it's a natural thing for me, but it's very much on purpose, and it's very much, I will definitely say, a political decision. You know what I mean? So like, I don't know. I mean, come at me, I guess. And, but like, yeah, my art will always be political, and my art is without a doubt political. So there's definitely a reason, and I hope that there's good storytelling there still. And that's definitely, I hope that's why people come to my books to begin with. But I put those characters and those decisions in my books and my work for a reason. And I think that, you know, that's definitely a lot of the reason why I didn't gravitate towards comics growing up, was that it was such a visual medium and I didn't readily see myself. And in a novel, it's a little easier to fill in the blanks as far as like what someone might look like, or what a world might look like. So I think that was a reason why I shied away. And I never really thought that there was a space for me in comics. And in publishing, we have this really great saying that it's, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so because I never saw it, I never felt like I could be it. And then I saw Faith and I was like, I can do that. I could write if I wanted to, because I can see it. So it's a very real thing.
Yeah, I think what got me was like with the pervasive nature of like just different forms of sexual orientation and stuff like in the book, was when Dr. Briner turns out to have a wife, like a female vet. I was like, man, okay. And it's so casually done too. You know, it's not like this moment where she stands up and says, I'm a lesbian too.
Right.
You know, she just sort of like, she has a wife and she, you know, they were yeah, I just found it really impressive.
Well, it's not like a veterinarian walks into the office. It's like, we're going to be your dog today. First, you should know I'm very gay.
I mean, honestly, if I might like that if I took my dog.
I mean, if I had to kill my dog, I would take them to a gay bed, obviously.
Love that.
I wanted to, I don't want to leave this entirely, but I meant to ask you something earlier, which I think it's sort of like another writing challenge. Was this is your first time writing for what's it called, Kayla? Like a IP? Is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Industry or whatever. So you're writing this sort of origin, but you know that you have to get to this place in some way, or you have to explain stuff like that. Did you lose a certain amount of freedom in doing that, or was that kind of like structure maybe they made it easier to write for you? Like, how did you reckon with that?
It was my first time writing with a team in mind, which was really exciting. I don't think I could do it all the time, but it was exciting for this project because there were certain parameters, but at the same time, there was a lot of room for creativity. So I did have a really great team at Valiant that I was working with, and they sort of created a timeline of all the non-negotiables in Faith's life, as far as like when her parents died, when she got her superpowers, how she got her superpowers, things like that. And then basically everything else I was allowed to fill in the blanks on. I started writing this book. Let me see. I have this series called like the Dumplin series, and that's, what I'm most well known for. And I started writing this book right after I wrote the second book in that series, and right after the first movie came out. And so I was like fried. I felt like, I didn't feel like I had like any creative juice left in me. And so really the only way that I could have like written a book is if I was doing it in this way. And that's not why I chose to do this, but it was really sort of like a godsend because it let me be just the right amount of creative. It let me like stretch my writing muscles and try something new. But I also wasn't having to think too big. I wasn't having to create a new world. I wasn't having to create new characters. I was just getting to sort of like color by numbers in a way, but like in a really fun and exciting therapeutic way, I guess.
It's great stuff. I mean, I was actually really amazed at your ability to fill this character out, because I read the comic, not the 1992 one, but the one that I think came out in 2016. It's like Hollywood and Vine. And it's a really interesting sort of superhero thing, but it's sort of hard to imagine how Faith sort of gets there as a person. And I was hoping you could comment on this, because one of the things I thought was like, there's a tragic element to this book, because, you don't make it easy on Faith. You know what I mean? Like the things that happen to this character, it's really sort of difficult. I don't want to give too much away, by the way, but very clearly she has a tragic upbringing, giving her parents, and then like her experiences with love are, let's say, difficult. And I just see this interesting contrast between this very bubbly, happy, optimistic person and this really hard hand that she's dealt a lot. And I was curious, do you see those things as connected, or was it just kind of what happened in the book?
No, they're definitely connected. I think that I am, if you can't tell after our conversation thus far, I'm not a very optimistic person. And not a pessimist, but I am a deeply realistic person. And so one thing that at first made me unsure about writing Faith was her relentless optimism. And I knew that if I was going to write Faith, I had to figure out why she was optimistic. And I do think that really true and genuine optimism like that has to be tested, and it has to be forged in some kind of fire.
Yeah.
So I wanted to see the hardship that Faith had to go through, and what on the other end of that hardship made it worth it, that she still has this optimism. So I will say there's a second book. So hopefully we'll get some, some more things for Faith that we'll feel excited about. But yeah, I mean, it's these superhero origin stories are always so tragic to me. And so they feel sometimes they feel really glossed over because it's not necessarily the exciting part of the story, but I love tragedy. And so it is the exciting part of the story to me. So yeah, it's definitely connected, but it was definitely a challenge for me when I was first approaching this, because I was like, I had just finished, this book put in with like a really effervescent, bubbly character. And I was like, I don't think I can do this again. But there definitely was a way forward. So.
I have to tell you, by the way, I didn't know there was a second book when I was this. I was like 3/4 the way through the book, and I was like, I don't know if this is gonna wrap up in time.
Oh, Jared, sweet summer child.
But it makes sense, and that to me really is the hero. I obviously can't speak for the intent here, but like to me, that's the heroism of the book, is that it's not just the things that she does that would are like super heroic, like flight, if no spoilers, fly, but it's that like she has really hard things happen to her. Especially the stuff that hit me was the stuff with her grandmother, because it was like there's another theme that happens a lot where you feel like, oh, even her powers can't fix the situation, and like the fact that she doesn't lose herself in that's like very impressive. I was trying to form that as a question.
Thanks. Honestly, thank you. But yeah, I think that one of the most enticing and exciting parts of a superhero story for me is when a superhero finds out that there's something worth fighting for. And so, yeah, like just having these powers and being able to save the world is a reason that you could fight. But really, your reason is deeper than that. And it should be tied to the people you value and the good that they can do in the world and how you can proliferate that good by saving the world. So yeah, I thank you.
the evidence for that is, of course, if we all had, like on this podcast, if we had powers, the many crimes that we would commit.
Oh yeah, I'm a Scorpio. I'm just ready.
Me too.
I'm a supervillain. I've already decided that if I'm a supervillain, my supervillain identity is obesity epidemic.
But Kayla, you're like against type. Like you're a Scorpio, but you're like the white knight Scorpio.
Yeah, it's true. I'm a disappointment to Scorpios everywhere.
No, that's okay. I have a friend who is also a white knight Scorpio, and I'll always go to her and I'm like, listen to this shit. And she's like, well, if you look at it this way, and I'm like, no.
All the Scorpios are like, we're revenge, and Kayla's like, but in a nice way. Like, we're just gonna try to keep this sort of tight. We don't want to waste too much of your time. I thought this would be kind of a good, open-ended ending question. But like, so what do you feel like you want your readers to take away from their reading Faith? Like, what's the sort of big takeaway for you?
I think the big takeaway is that everyone is capable of incredible things. And I know that that's probably like a very general sounding thing that people take away from comics in general, but I don't mean just everyone. I mean the plus size girls, I mean the queer kids, I mean the one random black kid at an all white school. Like you're all every one of those people is capable of incredible things. And I think it's important to not only believe that you are capable of incredible things, but believing that the people around you are capable of incredible things, because that's where you're going to start breeding like empathy and respect for other people. So I always get excited when, a plus size girl runs up to me and she's like, oh my God, I read your book. I love your book. But what really gets me excited is when like the prettiest girl at the school is like, oh my gosh, I loved your book. It really made me think. So I hope that, all the nerds out there who love Faith as much as I do read this book, but I also hope that people who are just I don't want to say an easy go at it, but people who are just like traditionally good looking or traditionally thinner or, white, just read these read a book like this and sort of rethink the people around them in their life.
Absolutely. I wanted to say thank you, by the way, for writing this, because it did make me think about things that I hadn't thought about before, because we all think about representation, and I think, or at least a lot of us do, and we should. But what had occurred to me, because we talk about heroism on this podcast a lot, is that like when you don't have people of diverse body shapes, when you don't have queer people, when you don't have people of color, you're not just excluding them from mediums, you're associating things about their moral character, because you're saying you're not thinking of them as heroes. And that makes zero sense. And I really think, I mean, it really is amazing stuff. And I learned something from reading it. And I really appreciate you writing it.
Thank you, Jared. Giant hard eyes. Hard eyes. And Noah and Kayla, this is great.
Before you go, so we do like to ask people, and I'm sure you've been asked this since you've written this book, but if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Oh man, this is hard. I have two answers to this. I always say invisibility for shady reasons. So maybe I should stop saying invisibility. But I really hate TSA lines. So I will also say teleportation.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's like, it's practical, and you could also be a superhero. So
yeah, you could do great things and you don't have to wait in line.
Thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I had so much fun.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Faith Taking Flight is available now to purchase at your local bookstore digitally, or go over to IamJulieMurphy.com to look at everything that she's written and also purchase Faith Taking Flight.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the FANtom Zone Pod for more podcast updates.